All right, everybody, welcome back. Good morning to everybody. Hope you're doing really good and staying safe, staying healthy. Welcome back to the live stream. This is Intro to Critical Reasoning and Writing, Orange Coast College, Tuesday, Thursday. This is our 11:10 to 12:35 crew, and basically we are going to go over some more fallacies today. We got about 2 minutes till the official class time, but to those arriving now, just good morning and welcome back. Hope you guys are doing really good, and let's get through these notes today, and we'll be finished up with the topic of fallacies after this. And then we have our quiz to take care of next week on Tuesday. So I'll send that test form around on Tuesday morning, right at class time, basically, and then you'll have the time period of the class session to send me back your responses. All right. Yeah, so we just got another batch of these fallacies to go over. I'm gonna go quickly adjust the lights a little if I can, see if I can get a little more. A little iced tea to drink here. All right. All right, just about ready. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you guys this morning. All right. So let's see, who's here? Anybody want to just throw in a quick hello or just tap in a little comment on the comment stream so I can see who we got? Hi, Sebastian. Good morning. Who else? Who's in the house today? Let's see. A couple more. Hey, Camilla. Good to see you. Hey, Carmen. Long. Bill. Awesome. Quick question. I don't suppose Nathan's here. Are you in there, Nathan, by chance? Nathan Malucky. I had a question for him, but also Connor Navarrete. Are you somewhere in there? If so, if either of those two guys heard what I'm asking, let me know later on. Otherwise, I'll reach out to them on the side. But hi, Catherine. Hi, Connor, and everybody else. Hey there, Veronica. Good morning. All right. Well, good to see you guys. Glad that we're up and at it today, ready to learn a little bit more. So let's say this. Hey, Tuan. Your homeworks, those were due today. Okay, so definitely if you didn't send it to me, make sure you do send it to me right as fast as you can. Okay, let me tell you this. No, people cannot submit. Well, here's the thing. If you submit work to me, you can't just hit reply to the Canvas message. There have been a couple delivery errors because of that. Some people's midterms, I did not get them because of that. Most everybody I did, just a couple names that I didn't, but the reason that happened in a few cases is because people were hitting reply to the Canvas course-wide announcement where I placed the attached file. You have to create a separate email when you send that midterm back. So I'm getting all the messages that are being sent through Canvas normally, like when you initiate the message, but I do not get messages if you just hit reply to a course-wide announcement. So you have to click, compose email, new email, type in my full email address. You know what it is, rvulish@occ.cccd.edu. But, I'm definitely receiving all of the homeworks for those that are doing it in the proper way. Later today, when I finish with my 2 o'clock group, I'll go back over, look through the list of all the submissions, and I will give a confirmation of receipt to those that did send it. So just something very brief, like, thank you for your homework. But anyway, knowing that in the future, when we're taking quizzes, like we're going to take one on Tuesday, and when we take the final and other things like that, create an email and send it to me in the email. I don't want to have this problem where, I'm not getting material from you guys, but you just got to make sure I do, okay? Anyways, thank you guys. Back to work. Let's go over a few things. And by the way, also, as I said last meeting, hey, Madison, I did grade all midterms, and anybody who wants their score has to come to me and ask for it by an email, and then I'll send you back your score together with the comments if you'd like, and I'll send you photos or scanned images of the comments. So I've been replying to people, and I told everybody that did send me a message that just give me within a 24-hour window to reply, but you'll get your response within the 24-hour period of time. So I replied to a lot of the messages that I have gotten, and if you're still waiting on your response, just know that it's coming within 24 hours of when you did send the question. Okay, and I'm going to send the answer key for this second homework later today as well. I'm just waiting to see if any late submissions come to me, because I don't want to give the answers out, obviously, until everybody's had their chance to submit. So maybe I'll wait until tomorrow or so, and then after I know that I'm not going to receive anything else, I'll send the answer key, and then you'll know exactly what you got on the homework, because you can simply compare it to the answer key that I'm going to provide. Okay, well, any questions about any of those different topics or anything about the class? I'd be happy to take any such questions. Thanks, Chris. I'm sure I got it. I'll double check. Not to worry. And once again, Nathan, Connor Navarrete, you two people not here right now? Okay, well, anyway, thought maybe I'd have a chance to catch those guys while here on the live stream, but I'll just deal with them by email later. Okay, so welcome back. Now we're down to the last group of fallacies. That's today's topic. So we've learned two other categories to this point. One of them was the fallacies of ambiguity, and there were 5 of those. That included equivocation, amphibole, accent, and division and composition. Last lecture, Tuesday, 2 days ago, we learned the second group, which is the fallacies of relevance. Okay, and that had a whole range: personal attack, appeal to force, appeal to pity, popular appeal, appeal to ignorance, hasty generalization, straw man, and red herring. So that was a substantial number of fallacies. There's 8 of those. Just a brief word about them, just as a quick summary again. Personal attack is the fallacy that happens when you don't respond to your opponent's argument, but instead you just attack them personally, either their character or their circumstances. Then there's appeal to force. That's the scare tactic fallacy, where to try and win an argument or get someone to agree with you, you simply use force or some threat. Hey, Elise. Appeal to pity. That's when you try to rely on pity and emotion to get your way or to get somebody to show you special favor, but it's not relevant to the context of the dialogue happening. So that's appeal to pity. Then there's popular appeal. That's when somebody refers to popular opinion to justify their claim or conclusion, like basically saying this is true because most people think so, or because it's the popular idea. Appeal to ignorance. That is claiming that something is true just because nobody's proven that it's false. But you need actual evidence to prove something, not just the absence of contrary evidence. Then there's hasty generalization. That's when you jump to a conclusion too quickly from limited evidence or experience. So a universal claim is made, but it's based on a sample that is either too small or not representative. Like if you just, I don't know, you read a story about one pit bull that attacked somebody, and then you just say, well, after I read that story, I just know all pit bulls are brutal and deadly. Maybe that's a hasty generalization from one atypical case. Okay, let's say straw man then. Straw man is the one where you take your opponent's actual argument and you misrepresent it so that it appears much worse than it really was. So if somebody said, you know, I don't know, I think that women should have the right to abortion, and then someone says, wait, what do you mean? Like, women should be able to kill a newborn? That's crazy. But this is not the same thing as advocate for pro-choice. So that would be an overhyped, exaggerated way of misrepresenting the person's viewpoint. And then last, there was the red herring. Red herring is when you try to distract from the main topic of the conversation or discussion to a different, separate, unrelated issue. Like in case somebody said, we really got to take care of this. We have to maintain social distancing to make sure that we flatten the curve on a coronavirus. And somebody else says, no way, man. I mean, come on, look, smoking is really dangerous. So what about that? But this is not the same issue, and it's totally not related. So it's a distraction from the main point. Okay. Well, that's just, I like to, start off a meeting with a little connection to the previous topics, going over them one last time. But anyway, now that that's all been reviewed, we're going to zoom into the next subject on this, which is the fallacies of unwarranted assumption. Fallacies of unwarranted assumption. So this is a new category of fallacies, and there are 7 members in this category. Like there were 5 fallacies of ambiguity, 8 fallacies of relevance, now 7 of these. That's a total of 20 overall. And the fallacies of unwarranted assumption, what groups them within this category is that these are when the argument contains or includes assumptions that are not supported by evidence. Okay, so what's the definition? Here's what the definition is. When an argument includes an assumption that is not supported by evidence. So, fallacies of unwarranted assumption. The concept of being warranted means being justified, in other words. It's like a synonym for the idea of justification, which we talked about before. To be justified or to have justification is to have solid reasons to back up what you believe. And you could even, say these reasons in case someone asked you, why is that true or correct? Now, unwarranted means that it is unjustified. So in other words, these are the fallacies that we see when there are unjustified, baseless assumptions found in an argument. So the argument's support comes from claims that don't have good evidence or reasons to base them. So unwarranted assumption fallacies. That's the basic definition of the category. Now that we see the category and the definition that it has, I can strike that off the board, and I'm going to write the names of the 7 members of this clan, the 7 individual members of the fallacies of unwarranted assumption group. Okay, so moving on from this definition, now I'm going to list the 7. And the goal for today is to just be clear and comprehensive of this set of 7 terms. So the 7 fallacies of unwarranted assumption. First of all, you have what's called begging the question. All right. Afterward, the next one would be inappropriate appeal to authority. Inappropriate appeal to authority. The third, it's called loaded question. Okay, loaded question. Then, false dilemma, false dilemma. Hopefully you can read that. It's the letter M there, MMA, dilemma. And then questionable cause. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Got 2 more. So then there's slippery slope. And then the last one in the set that we learned today, I'll just put it over here to give myself a little room. It's called the naturalistic fallacy. Okay, so there's 7 different terms, 7 different fallacies of unwarranted assumption. And simply we have to go over these 7 terms and just understand the definitions and comprehend some examples of them. All right, so as usual, I'm going to begin at the top. Now that we see the names of all 7 of these things, I will go ahead, just starting with the first, give you our understanding of begging the question. Okay. Okay, cool. So what is begging the question? All right, so the begging the question fallacy happens when one of the premises of the argument is just a reworded version of the conclusion. Okay, so when one of the premises of the argument is a reworded version of the conclusion. All right, begging the question. So, important key to the definition, it's that one of the premises is a reworded version of the conclusion. So the problem with this type of argument is that if the premise is just the same statement as the conclusion, but in slightly different words, then it's not an independent reason for the conclusion. It's the conclusion itself. And if you remember, right, the conclusion is the statement that you're trying to prove to be true. The conclusion is. You want to show that this conclusion is true. And the premises then are the reasons or the evidence that is supposed to justify and back up that conclusion. But it's a circular argument, as they say. That's another sort of name for this fallacy, circular argument. It's a circular argument or begs the question if the premise is identical to the conclusion. In that case, the evidence would be the same thing as what the evidence is trying to prove. And that is a bad fallacious argument. Like here, I'll give you some examples. So looking at our book. All right, so look at this argument here. Just one of our examples from the text. I'm just going to have it be this one premise, then this conclusion below. Okay, so say the premise, the conclusion is capital punishment is wrong. Capital punishment is wrong. That's what the conclusion of this argument is. And so just like any argument, there has to be at least some premise to justify or back that up. So suppose here's the premise of this argument. That, well, why is capital punishment wrong? Because it's immoral for the state to use death as a punishment. So what it says here is, the premise says it is immoral for the state to use death as a penalty. Therefore, capital punishment is wrong. All right, now let's think about what's written on that board. Why does this argument beg the question? Why does this argument commit the fallacy of begging the question? Because let's study the statements here. First of all, what is another word or term for capital punishment, if anybody knows? Capital punishment is just another way of saying what? What is capital punishment, if you know? I'm sure some of us do. So let's see who can tell me that. Capital punishment. What is that? In other words, if like a child asks you, hey, I heard this word on TV. I don't know what it means. Can you tell me what is capital punishment? Okay, now you're the adult. You're going to tell this person. What is it? Question for you. I don't know the answer. What is it? It is the death penalty. That's right. So capital punishment is just another way of referring to the death penalty. What is it for something to be? What's another way of saying that something is wrong in a moral sense? Saying that something's wrong is no different than saying that it's what? Punishment by death of a crime. Yes, that's another way of saying what capital punishment is. That's true. When the state executes people as a penalty for, the worst offenses, that's the death penalty, aka capital punishment. But I'm asking another question now. What is another synonym for the term wrong? To say something's wrong is another way of saying that it's immoral. Connor, there you are. Connor, send me an email, please. You have to check your email. I sent you something. We got to clarify one thing, but it's not a problem. Just check your message, Connor. Thank you. But anyway, yeah, to say that something is wrong is just the same as saying that it is immoral. So what this argument basically says is that capital punishment is wrong because capital punishment is wrong. But that's not, thank you very much. Yeah, we'll deal with this. Not to worry, but thank you for letting me know, Connor. Anyway, back to what I'm saying here. The claim that capital punishment is wrong is supported by this premise that it's immoral for the state to use death as a penalty. But this is just going around in circles. The question is, why is capital punishment wrong? And the reason says it's wrong because it's wrong. So that is not a good argument. It doesn't supply independent reasons why capital punishment is wrong. Now, there could be good arguments that are, valid for capital punishment being wrong. Some people don't agree with death penalty. Some people would say the inherent dignity of human life should be protected at all costs, even when people commit grave crimes, and therefore capital punishment is wrong. Or you could say to give the state the power to execute is to empower the state beyond what is safe in a free society, therefore capital punishment is wrong. But you can't just say it's wrong because it's wrong. In that case, you're not giving any reason, you're just saying just because. And that's the begging the question fallacy. So that's one example of it. Let me just give you some more while we're on this one topic, just make sure we're very clear about it. A little graph is shown in the text to give you a sort of visual sense of how this fallacy can be understood. So this is the typical structure where you have premise and then conclusion below. But with the begging the question fallacy, the conclusion is supposed to be supported by the premise, but the premise is the same thing as the conclusion. So they sometimes call this a circular argument. The evidence is the same thing as the claim that's supposed to be based on the evidence. So that's a circular argument fallacy. In other words, it's called begging the question. They call it begging the question because the question remains. If you've given no different reason for the conclusion besides the statement itself, then the question remains, why should this conclusion be believed or supposed to be true? Here's another example from the book. Let me, I'll give you another one of my own just before we go back to the book. So suppose that somebody says this. This is their argument. So their conclusion is abortion is immoral. Okay, now there's a lot of people that do think abortion is immoral. There's a whole pro-life movement. Of course, there's opponents of that, pro-life, pro-choice. But without, saying one way or the other what a person's view is, just imagine that one individual has this conclusion, abortion is immoral. And so then the question to them is, well, why? Why do you say it's immoral? Okay, so they give you this reason. Because terminating a pregnancy is wrong. So it is wrong to terminate a pregnancy. Therefore, abortion is immoral. But hopefully you can sort of follow the discussion that we're having along these lines with this concept. What is another way of saying the phrase abortion? Like, what is an abortion in more specific detail? You can, I think, infer what I'm going for based on the example. When one gets an abortion, what is one really doing? I'll just wait for it. I know it takes a little moment to type in and for the lag to happen, but let me know. Abortion is also, you could call it what? It's a question. I don't have the answer. I don't know what the answer is. You've got to answer it. What is abortion, in other words? It's also known as terminating a pregnancy. Good, John. So to say that it's wrong to terminate a pregnancy is the same thing as saying abortion is immoral, because again, immoral is synonymous with something being wrong. So in this case, the argument says abortion is immoral because abortion is immoral. Or putting it another way, abortion's wrong, therefore abortion's wrong. But that's not a substantial argument. Now there could be, and there actually are, very detailed arguments that people do give towards this conclusion. You could say anything with a potential future, like a human being, has a right to live, and a fetus does have that, so therefore it's wrong to destroy the fetus. But this is not the same thing as just repeating the claim in the premise position. So that would be another fallacy of circular argument. All right. I mean, you could imagine the same kind of circular argument on the other side. Someone's conclusion being abortion is not wrong, and then the premise being it is not morally impermissible to end one's pregnancy. Therefore, abortion is not wrong. But that would be circular in its own right, just repeating the conclusion in different words. Here's one last example then before I move on. This is from the book too. This one might take a little more of a moment to consider, but let's just put it on the table. So, okay, so the argument says this. Let's give it two premises. The conclusion is that God exists. So this is an argument trying to make the case for God's existence, the existence of God. Okay, so first premise of the argument says God wrote the Bible. Second premise says the Bible says that God exists. And so therefore God exists. Now, this argument here, let's look at it and think. Which of those premises there, number 1 and 2, is assuming the truth of the conclusion? Which of the premises is assuming that the conclusion is already true before we've gotten to the conclusion? So when you look at number 1 and 2, read through them, and then take the judgment. Which one of them already presupposes the existence of God? Because the conclusion is that God exists. Therefore, it's not supposed to be already assumed in the premises. Otherwise, the argument does go in a circle. But one of these two premises there makes the assumption of God's existence. And which of those two is it? Got two choices. It's not too hard, I think, to judge, but let's see. Two premises written there. And no, it's not number 2. No. It's the first one, okay? Because the second one doesn't claim that God exists. It just says that the Bible says God exists. But the first premise says that who wrote the Bible? The first premise says who wrote it. It's not number 2, everybody, so everyone got it wrong. It's the first one, because the first one says who wrote the Bible. You could read it. God, right? So in order for something to write anything, it has to exist. Isn't that correct? So the first premise is already assuming that the God which wrote the Bible does exist. So basically the argument goes in a circle. The claim of the existence of God is being backed up by the statement that God wrote something, but we would have had to already have assumed that God exists if we would grant the first premise. So it's a circular argument yet again. And that's what it says here on page 153. Here, the conclusion God must exist is already assumed to be true in the premise that God wrote the Bible. To offer a rational proof of God, we cannot assume in our premise the existence of what we are trying to prove. Now, there are decent arguments for God's existence. I have to teach those a lot of times in different philosophy classes, and I do every semester. You could argue that everything has to have a cause, and the universe exists, so therefore there must be a cause of the universe, and whatever that cause is cannot be something which itself requires a cause, because that would lead us into an infinite regress. There's all kinds of arguments that are sophisticated for the sake that God exists. But you can't merely say God exists because he exists. There's my argument. That's just begging the question. Okay, good, Veronica. Yes, true. So we've talked then about begging the question. And so got to try and avoid committing that fallacy. I'll say a little last piece about it here. The begging the question fallacy can be very frustrating if we fail to recognize it, since there's no way to disprove the person's conclusion if we accept the premise. So if you think an argument contains this fallacy, try reversing the conclusion and premise to see if the argument will say exactly the same thing. Sometimes people reason in this way without even realizing it. Someone might say, this person's such a mean human being. And someone asks them, well, what's the reason you feel like that? Why do you think they're so mean? They say, oh, because, they're awful. They're nasty. But they just keep on repeating the statement without giving any independent grounds for the conclusion. Someone could say, your claim is false. And you tell them, well, what makes you think that? And be like, because come on, it's just completely false. But they're just repeating the same statement again. So that's begging the question. And that's the first one. So we're going to move on then. All right, we're going to number 2, the second one in this group. All right, so next up, it is called inappropriate appeal to authority. All right, so second fallacy of unwarranted assumption is the inappropriate appeal to authority fallacy. So with this one, the problem is that a person refers to some presumed authority in order to justify a claim or conclusion that they're making. But it's a fallacy when you're appealing to an authority who is not actually an expert in the field that you're discussing. Okay, so when you appeal to an authority to support your argument, but this person is not an expert on that topic. But, and this is the key error, but this person that you're appealing to for support is not an authority or an expert on that topic. Okay, so false authority, appeal to authority, inappropriate appeal to authority. Consider, for example, that sometimes people rely on the testimony of individuals that don't have any expertise on something. Somebody might say, for example, the other day I was talking to, my dentist, just having a chat while I was getting some fillings put in. And he was telling me that it's the time to sell all your stocks, sell. So because the dentist said that, it's time to get rid of those stocks, you see? This person, though, is an expert on something. This is my cat, you all know that. But anyway, this person that's being appealed to is not really an expert on financial matters. Now, a dentist is an expert in the world of dentistry and teeth, right? But that's not the type of person who you should rely on when you make decisions about how to invest. So if you had an investment banker or that was helping you manage your portfolio, and you said they said that I should sell or that I should invest in certain stocks, that could be a proper appeal to authority. But it's inappropriate when it's a person who's outside the realm of expertise. You make a mention there, John, of Alex Jones. I would say that's fair. There's a lot of talking heads and sort of professional rabble-rousers out there who like to pose as though they have expertise on something, merely to maybe sell products and then sometimes win a larger platform for the dissemination of their ideas and probably to profit as well. And in some cases, people will make the false assumption that they have expertise, which they claim, but they don't. If you're hearing scientific claims, but they're not being made by scientific experts, and you rely on them, like political speech makers or whoever, then that would be another case of inappropriate appeal to authority. Here's one from the book. A person says, my pastor, my priest says that genetic engineering is not safe. So therefore, I agree. I think that all the experimentation in that field should be stopped. And as it says here, unless your priest also happens to be an expert in genetic engineering, before accepting his argument as correct, you should ask him for reliable and authoritative evidence for his assertion. So, the priest is an expert on something. That's matters having to do with the history of the church and theology. They could probably tell you a lot about the scriptures and how to properly interpret them and, their historical origins and so forth. But that's not the sort of person, perhaps, that you'd want to refer to in making a case against some type of scientific practice or commercial procedure. Veronica, you say, isn't that almost everyone on social media? I mean, it can be sometimes, right? People claiming that they rely on, the statements of people that don't have any expertise, or maybe they themselves are the ones that issue pronouncements from a position of having no authority or knowledge. So you just have to know that there's proper channels to rely on when you're studying or trying to investigate a topic. If you want to know about history, talk to a historian. Don't talk to, a person like me, a philosopher. I know a lot about history too, but it's not my discipline. So if you said, for example, Professor Vulich, Dr. Vulich, he told me, that helium is the heaviest element, and therefore that must be true, right? Well, I'm not a chemist. In fact, personal fact about me was that was my worst subject ever back in high school. I really struggled with chemistry. I still kind of have nightmares about it. But anyway, I went on, of course, to get my PhD. I'm a professor. I have a lot of knowledge in philosophy, and I can and will tell you everything about, logic, argument, the history of ideas in the West, but I'm outside of my depth when it comes to chemistry and a whole bunch of other topics. So sometimes the inappropriate appeal to authority fallacy happens when there is a title that a person has which justifies their authority in a separate arena, like a medical doctor giving you stock tips. This is a person who has the title of doctor, but they're not the kind of person who's, let's say, an economist. I have the title of doctor because I have a research-based doctorate, a PhD in philosophy, but I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not like, a person who got their degree or whatever in a separate field within the humanities or sciences. So you got to seek the proper expertise. Sometimes, though, titles, as it says in the book, uniforms and distinguished titles such as doctor, professor, officer, president, lieutenant, can serve to reinforce the mistaken perception that people that are experts in one field must be experts in every field. So to avoid inappropriate appeal to authority, make sure you always determine the expert's credentials within the field that you're appealing to their testimony within to make sure that it's authoritative. Sometimes celebrities are used to promote consumer products and services, and these celebrities don't have any knowledge on the topic or the product itself that they're endorsing. So you could see an easy source of inappropriate appeal to authority if, like, Michael Phelps, the old Olympic swimmer, is advertising, like AirPods or something. He's not, let's say, a person who's like a sound engineer or like a audiophile per se. He's an expert swimmer. So in that case, his authority as a swimmer has nothing to do with the product that he's endorsing. Okay, so that's number 2 for us now. I'm going to go on then, and I'm going to move to our next example. So we continue with the next one. All right, what we have now is loaded question fallacy. All right, so loaded question, it's like when a person asks a presumptuous question, a leading question that makes an assumption that is not known to the person asking that question. So basically the definition would be when you ask a question that assumes an answer to a different question that you did not ask, okay? Unasked question. All right. So you see there our definition. That's loaded question fallacy. It is, again, it's when you ask a question to somebody, but the problem is the way you ask this question is making an assumption to an answer of another question that you don't even know the answer to. So, for example, like, how could this be a loaded question? Somebody asks you, who did you vote for in 2016? That could be a loaded question, maybe, if it's because it could be seen as assuming what about the person that maybe is not known by the asker of the question. Who'd you vote for in 2016? Sounds like a straightforward question, but how could that be a loaded question? What assumption is built into the way the question is asked? Let's see what you can tell me from that. What could it be? So, question is, who'd you vote for in 2016, the last presidential? How's this a loaded question, maybe? It's assuming the person voted at all, right? So maybe the person would have to say, I'm sorry, that's a loaded question. I can't give you a straight answer because it's assuming I voted and I actually didn't. It's a good thing, I think, for everybody to vote, but you probably can't make the assumption of a person's voting record without knowing it first. Or yeah, John, you made this point. I could ask it slightly differently, a different question. Someone asks you, which political party are you registered with? Well, you might say I declined to state. Like that's me, for example. I don't affiliate with either one, so I'm officially a declined to state person, unaffiliated. I'm a registered voter, of course, but not with any of the major parties. So if somebody said, which party are you registered with? I would have to tell them that's a loaded question being asked to me because I'm unaffiliated with any. So first impressions are whether or not someone will agree with someone else based on belief. Yeah, it depends on the nature of the question. It's not always about politics too. So like somebody could ask, what if somebody asks you, where are you working right now? Where do you work? How could that be a loaded question? That's easy enough, but I just want to see you give me the feedback. Someone asks that question, where do you work? Especially right now, that could be a loaded question for a lot of people because what's the assumption there? Let's get it on the table. You heard the question. It assumes the person has a job, right? And the question then is just, where is it at? But if you don't work right now, or if you're unemployed or whatever, then you can't give an answer to the question, where do you work? The answer is, I don't have a job. Not where is it? There's no such thing. And so there's lots of different possibilities. Which religion do you practice? If you're not a religious practitioner of any religion, then that's a loaded question. Who are you dating? Maybe they don't know your relationship status and you're actually not dating or seeing anybody. Let's see some other cases. I've seen this one asked before in real life one time, and I thought it was like really a cringy, kind of embarrassing thing for the person that got involved with that. But a question was asked to a woman at the workplace. Hey, I noticed you changed a little. When is the baby due? And this was a loaded question because it was assuming the person was pregnant, and the question was just based around when is the baby going to be delivered, but the person wasn't pregnant at all. So, it was kind of like a little body shaming in a way unintentionally in that case. So, another example. Another case where loaded questions can happen, you got to be a little bit careful about this, is in a legal context. Sometimes, there could be officers, lawyers, yeah, right, who ask questions that try to rope you into giving a confession or to admitting things that maybe you didn't really do. Like when when let's say the lawyer asks the person being cross-examined on the witness stand, look, sir, just tell us, why did you do it? Why did you commit the crime? That's a loaded question if the person claims not guilty, right? Because it's assuming guilt, and it's just asking, what's the motive for this crime that you in fact did do? But if you didn't commit the crime, you can't answer, well, here's why, because it's simply something that you didn't do at all. Okay. Have you know, when's the last time you're hungover, something like that, assuming something about your personal habits that may not be true if you haven't had a hangover. Which kind of car do you drive if you don't currently drive? So I think that the examples are making it clear, hopefully, to you guys. That's how loaded question goes. One more example from the book. It says, do you think that the death penalty should only be for the people that are over 18? How could that be a loaded question? The question is, do you think that they should only apply death penalty to people that are over the age of 18? This could be seen as a loaded question because it makes the assumption about the person's viewpoint that what? They think that what? Do you think it should just be for people over 18, the death penalty? How's that a loaded question? What's the assumption built into that question? That the person believes that the death penalty should be given to anybody, right, Veronica? So some people are opponents of the death penalty, and if you ask that person, do you think it should just be for people over 18? They would say, well, come on, you're assuming that I believe it should be given out to anybody, but I don't believe in it in the first place. It's not necessarily the most marginal view, the opposition to the death penalty. I mean, in the state of California, Gavin Newsom, our own governor, has put moratorium on death penalty during the entire term of his governorship. And there have been other governors that have used executive order to abolish it in their own states. So obviously it's still a federally applicable punishment for capital crimes, but many people have moral opposition to it. So anyways, some examples of loaded question. Now that we've covered it, we're good, and we can continue with the next one. Okay, so what's next is called false dilemma. Okay, so false dilemma is the name of the fallacy. So let's see how to explain this one. This is when one reduces the responses to a complex issue to a binary either-or choice. Okay. When one to a binary either or choice. So sometimes it's called fallacy of false choice. It's when somebody puts it as though there's only two options, but in reality there's more than those two, and they're being ignored by the way that the issue is being framed. So like, say that somebody asks you, where do you stand? Are you like a hardcore right-wing conservative or like a really hardcore left-wing liberal? Which one? This could be seen as a false dilemma. Because why? Because it's making it seem like there's only these two, radical opposition views, but there are other options. Some people will be moderate. They'll be in the middle, and they won't necessarily agree with either of the two extremes. So in the way that this choice was framed, it's a false dilemma. It's a false choice. You're asking me, am I really extreme on one or the other of the two sides of the political divisions? And you might say that's not really an accurate way of presenting the options that exist. What if somebody says to you, what do you think? Should it be that there's a big border wall, or that we just have no border controls whatsoever? I mean, which one do you believe in? You could say that's also a false dilemma because it ignores the possibility of intermediate strategies like having some border controls and policies, but perhaps not the implementation of a wall, which some argue, might pose its own disadvantages and costs. So anyway, if you say there's only these two policy options, which one would it be? Take your pick. Then you could say, no, it's a false dilemma. There's definitely a whole range of possible options in the middle there. A classic example of this that's mentioned in the book is the old argument, maybe you've heard it somewhere before, that what is your attitude towards the country? Love it, or do you want to just leave it? Which one, love it or leave it? Obviously, that's a false dilemma too, because it's certainly possible for a person to want to do neither thing, neither love it and just stay right there. In fact, staying there and complaining is probably one of the most, liberty expressing things that you can do in a free society. It's only in a totalitarian dictatorship where you're expected to salute, the leadership, or else be executed or removed from society or whatever. So in a free democracy in the Western world that we live in, it's certainly more options than just loving it or leaving it. How about just being a critic and just criticizing it while you stay there because you're born there? Or if you're not born there, you're still a citizen, so you have the right to make your statements. Next up, let's see. How does this person really feel about me? I'm kind of worried. I just don't know. Do they love me or do they hate me? Are they with me or are they against me? This kind of like really stratified thinking where there's only two polar extremes, they're usually a false dilemma. Because many people, you ask, do you love me or hate me? The attitude could be neither one. I'm just, you're fine. It's just indifferent to you. I don't really hate you or have this passionate love. It's just kind of a middle ground. And sometimes people think in these all or nothing terms, and that's where they get caught up in this fallacious way of reasoning. Either everybody likes me or everyone hates me. Either I have total control over a situation or I'm completely out of control. A lot of times, the truth is somewhere in the middle, and false dilemma ignores those middle ground possibilities. Sometimes when opinion polls and surveys are conducted, they can commit these fallacies. Yeah, I see your comment there, Paley. After 9/11, Bush did say you're either with us or against us, and this is a classic example of the type of fallacy that's being mentioned here. It's not known only within one or the other political actor's speech. A lot of times the rhetorical flourish of a powerful person makes reference to these types of fallacies, but it's really not the best way to reason, and we should not necessarily be manipulated into thinking that there's only those two options. So say, for example, a poll or survey was given to you, and it doesn't give you enough options to give a fair-minded response. This happens a lot, and it can kind of create a biased result in the poll. Like, for example, here it says in the book, how the options are presented can influence the response. For example, in one survey, people were asked these questions. Do you think the courts deal too harshly or not harshly enough with criminals? That's only two alternatives. When they were only given those two alternatives, 6% said too harshly, 78% said not harsh enough. But when they were given a third alternative, saying don't have enough information to say, 29% chose that response. So it completely shifted the outcome of the poll. So be careful sometimes when studying the results of polling data to make sure that the way the questions are framed don't commit the false dilemma fallacy in and of themselves. Otherwise, the poll itself doesn't contain perhaps valuable information because it's only allowing certain responses when there are more that are actually logically possible. Okay, so just in general, to avoid this fallacy or being tricked by it, kind of watch out for either or questions that put you on the spot, like take a pick. Is it this or is it that? Many times when such a dilemma is being posed to you, you could note that it's a false dilemma and ask the person to reconsider the state of options that do exist. And if neither alternative makes sense or is satisfactory, then it's better for you to just say, I'm not sure. Okay, good. So we've gone over the false dilemma fallacy, and now we're getting just to the last few. We've got just two more, right? So go to question, false dilemma, appeal to authority, 1, 2, 3, 4. How many I've given you? Oh yeah, so there's a couple more. So next one is questionable cost. Okay. Here's questionable cost fallacy. All right, so what is questionable cost? This is the fallacy that happens when one thing is assumed to be the cause of another, but there's not very good evidence to link the two things. So when one assumes without good reason or evidence that one thing is the cause of another. Without good evidence, yeah, so when one assumes without good evidence that one thing is the cause of something else. This is sometimes also known in a Latin word as the post hoc fallacy. Post hoc ergo propter hoc would be like a full-blown title of it, but it just is the case of an assumption that one thing caused another, but there's no real rational connection between them. A lot of times it happens when just one thing happens before something else in time, and then simply because it happened first, people think that it's the cause of the second thing that happened later, but there's no other reason. And that's usually questionable, hence the title, questionable cause. So, like say for example, you're walking along and you step on like a real big crack on the sidewalk, and then you get like a text message from your mom 10 minutes later, and she's like, oh no, my back, I just really hurt my back, I fell and I've got like a shattered vertebrae back there, I gotta go to the hospital. Okay, so look, she broke her back. Maybe you guys know the old nursery rhyme, but what I'm going for here is, suppose that this person now concludes that what caused her to break her back? It's like a superstition, you know, but in this case, I'm pretty much letting you know that the questionable cause would be to assume that what caused it in the scenario given. Why'd she break her back? Because you stepped on the crack. Okay, now that's questionable, isn't it? To suppose that that's really what caused it. Of course it didn't cause it. If that was so, then everyone's mother would have a broken back at some point in life. So, you know, to associate you stepping on the crack in a completely different part of time and space with a person breaking their own back or having an injury somewhere else, this is questionable and there's not any evidence. So a lot of superstitious beliefs and stuff can be fit within this category. A black cat crosses your path as you're walking around or whatever, and then, I don't know, you get into a little minor car accident and your car's kind of damaged after that later in the same day. Now, you might be a person who says, you know what, I know it. I knew it once that cat crossed my path, something bad would happen, and that's really the cause, you know? Cat crossed the path, car accident happened later, so, you know, you tell me what caused it. It was the cat. But obviously, that's no causal connection. A car accident is caused by the roadway factors and the drivers that are involved, not by something else that's completely irrelevant to the case, or you broke a mirror, you walked under a ladder, and then something bad happened. Same kind of example. So here's a case that's mentioned in the book, which I find, it's good examples, Chris. Yeah, you know, you got out of bed wrong, and then later on, you know, something not so nice happened, and so you're thinking, oh, I knew it from the time I got up, or there are, you know, gray clouds on the horizon. Then you learn that an old friend is in the hospital, and so you're like, oh, that was an omen, you know, or somehow causally connected, but of course they're unrelated. So here's something real from the book that I thought was kind of an interesting example of this. So you guys have probably heard of Jennifer Lopez. You know, she's the singer and actress. She just did the Super Bowl halftime show, which now seems like 100 years ago. But anyway, she has this mother who won $2 million on a slot machine. I mean, this is crazy, right? Because Jennifer Lopez and her family, due to her wealth, are already very wealthy and secure. But I guess she also got $2 million more just from playing the slots. But anyway, right before she pulled the lever to you know, try the machine, she said a little good luck charm, you know, like a little superstitious good luck charm, and then she actually hit the jackpot. So in her view, you know, that's the cause. Because I said this little incantation, that's why I won. But obviously that can't be the cause, because if it could be, then people would learn that, and they could just reliably game the system, and then the casinos would go out of business, and the house would always lose. So obviously there's no reliable mechanism by which a person can rig the slot machine simply by reciting a little, you know, a couple of phrases. But anyway, people will sometimes hold these kind of superstitious views. Or you say, I wore my lucky, you know, socks, and then the class was canceled, and that was good for me because I wasn't prepared. So I think it caused the good luck with the wearing of the socks. Couldn't have been. Can't wait to tell little kids that it's a questionable cause fallacy. Well, they got to learn sometime, don't they? Better to get them started early. Babe Ruth, famous Hall of Famer baseball player. Probably it's a household name to most all of you. So let's see. The Boston Red Sox traded him to the Yankees in 1920. And because of that, he cursed. He said, "I'm putting a curse on the Boston Red Sox." And then it took 8 decades before they ever finally won the World Series in 2004. But before 2004, there was this kind of like sporting, myth that the curse of Babe Ruth is preventing the Boston Red Sox from ever, winning the World Series. Now, obviously, there's no reliable connection between those two things. The composition of the team, the outcome of an individual game can't be dictated by something that has happened completely in the past with a person that's long dead. So, people are sometimes given to this way of thinking, but it's a fallacious way of thinking. It's not rational. You need evidence, basically. To associate a cause with an effect, you need some kind of reliable evidence that could be understood by independent observers. So this is a fallacy in all those cases. So don't just assume that there's a causal connection between two things just because they happen near each other in time or because one thing happened before the other. You need more realistic evidence than that to make a credible assessment of cause. Okay, so I'm going to move on, and we got just 2 more now, so we're getting to the end. All right, so what is next is called slippery slope. All right, so what the slippery slope fallacy is, it is the unjustified idea that if we permit a certain type of action, then eventually all actions of this type will either be taken or permitted. Okay, so the unjustified assumption that if one type of action is taken or permitted, that eventually all actions of this type will be either taken or allowed or permitted. So the unjustified assumption that if one type of action is allowed to take place, or it does take place, that eventually all actions of that type will be either taken or permitted. And usually the slippery slope fallacy implies that the further actions that will follow from the initial one are going to be worse and worse in a kind of increasingly negative sequence like that. So like the format of it is typically don't go down that path, because if you even start down that path a little bit, it's going to lead to worse and worse and worse stuff of the same kind. So like it's wrong though, because evidence of that kind doesn't generally support the prediction. So go back in time a little bit before same-sex orientation people were allowed to serve openly in the military. For one example, this was a policy that was rescinded under the Obama administration called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Under the Clinton era, Bill Clinton, there was a new policy that was given which said if you're in the U.S. military and you're gay, you just can't tell anybody and people won't ask you either. But that was a problem for a lot of folks because they wanted to be able to declare openly, what their sexual orientation was, even if they're serving in the military and the armed forces. So anyway, the policy was rescinded, but there was a lot of debate that happened when the policy was revised. Some people were saying this: if we allow gay people to openly serve in the military, then we're opening the door to a loss of unit cohesion and lack of military readiness. And so it may seem like a good idea right now, but the gradual erosion of military readiness is going to lead us to be completely vulnerable to attack, and we're going to get overthrown. So don't let it happen, because if you do, just expect this dystopian nightmare to follow, where our military basically collapses from within. It doesn't have the proper sort of camaraderie at whatever in the fighting ranks, and that undermines our own safety. But of course, the policy was changed, and none of those foretold negative, disastrous consequences did happen. In fact, having people that can serve openly without fear of intimidation or persecution probably enhances the strength of the fighting forces, and there's got to be some evidence for that too. So anyways, maybe one example. Another case, take the development of artificial intelligence in AI labs. Some people might say this: you probably should stop working on those artificial intelligent computers, because it seems like it's fun and games now, but if you start doing that and we allow this research to go forward, we're on a slippery slope to what do you think would be the slippery slope outcome here? Start building more and more smart computers. Down the line, what could happen? According to the slippery slope, overhyped, negative prediction. Why shouldn't a person develop computers that have artificial intelligence? Because what could be the harm of that? Person's going to say what? Maybe it'd take you a little creativity, but just think about it, right? Why would maybe a person warn you off from advocating further research in artificial intelligence? What could it be? Why? The AI will take over. Yeah, robot domination. You want to be enslaved by a robot? You want to be working for the robots when they take over the human world and try to eliminate us? And then but that's the thing. That dystopian, completely radical, prediction seems to have no real bearing on the evidence that suggests what computers will be likely to do. So AI, maybe another one, a classic one that you maybe have heard, the gateway drug argument. Some argue that that's a slippery slope argument. Someone says, don't even take like one little sip of that alcohol or whatever, smoke a little of that marijuana, because if you do, it's not going to stop there. It'll put you on a slippery slope to total addiction to the worst drugs. Eventually, you're going to be a total crackhead, never able to finish jobs, never able to stay in school, support a family. Then you're basically going to die alone in a gutter. So don't take even one step in that direction. But, a lot of people, fair to say, are able to, within reasonable and moderate constraints, enjoy certain substances like alcohol, and it doesn't lead to every single person becoming a hopeless addict. You've heard it said when it came to gay marriage, if gay marriage is allowed, then maybe eventually people are going to be allowed to marry more and more stuff that doesn't have anything to do with even human beings. Maybe you can marry your fridge, maybe you can marry your microwave. But again, we did allow for that by the Supreme Court decision of 2015, and none of those things are happening. So anyways, slippery slope fallacy. The name of it, slippery slope, it comes from, would a chain argument be an example of slippery slope? Okay, Sebastian, good question. Well, a chain argument could be valid though, if each link in the chain is rationally well supported. But in some cases though, yeah, that would have the structure of a chain argument. Like, there was this insurance company a few years back that had some advertisements on TV that kind of played around with this fallacy. It was like, if you don't have Allstate, then you're not going to be able to get your car out of the ditch when the tire goes flat. And if you can't get your tire out of the ditch, then you're going to end up having to sleep in the ditch. And if you have to sleep in the ditch, then you're going to end up getting arrested. And you're going to get arrested, you're going to be homeless. So you can imagine that if the next step in the so-called chain sequence is unlikely to occur on the basis of the first act, then that could sort of be structurally similar or parallel, correct? So yeah, the slippery slope fallacy, it's called that because of an obvious reason, I think. There's a visual sort of metaphor to think about. You're about to imagine a person standing on top of a slope, like a hilly slope where there's a steep decline. And the thought of the title of the fallacy is, don't you take one step toward, down that slope, because it looks like one step right now, and it's just one little tiny step, but it's not going to stop with the one step. It's a slippery slope. So if you take that one step, you're going to lose your footing, and you're going to cascade down the hill and get further and further, worse and worse injuries as you, slide down in this really rough, steep decline. So it's kind of parallel to that. Don't allow one type of action to be taken, not in a actual slope sense, but don't take one step in that direction or allow that to be done, because it will continue in that same way. There's an old children's story that I think kind of had a sense of this fallacy. So in a weird way, I think to myself, was this the best children's story? Were we teaching them not to think, as the slippery slope fallacy indicates, but if you give a mouse a cookie? Maybe anyone ever heard of that? The story said, if you give a mouse a cookie, well, you shouldn't give him the cookie, because if you do, he's going to like the cookie, but then he's going to want 2 of them. Then he's going to want some milk. And then he's going to want to have a place of his own to eat it in the house. Then he's probably going to want to have more room in the house. Eventually, maybe can you get out of the house and live in the garage so he can have the whole thing? It started with one little cookie, but it went down this slippery slope. Now, I don't know what the moral of that story is for kids. Don't trust people. Don't do anything nice for them. But anyway, you can sort of see the resonance there. Okay, so then we're down to the last one then, and that's what's called the naturalistic fallacy. Okay, so the naturalistic fallacy is when a person just assumes that whatever is natural must be good, and whatever is not natural must be bad. Okay, so okay, so that is the naturalistic fallacy. So this is committed all the time. Take, for example, the anti-vaccine movement. Somebody might say, these vaccines are not found in nature, so they must be bad for you. But that's really a bad argument, because if everything that was unnatural was bad for you, then should you really be driving a car? Should you even be looking at this computer screen right now? Should you ever take Tylenol? Technology and human mastery of nature and intervention into nature is precisely the reason that we have such developed and advanced civilizations at this point in history. So unless you're really willing to give up all of your technology, or think that it's all bad and wrong, then you probably can't agree with the assessment of the naturalistic fallacy. John, you ask, how does the naturalistic fallacy compare and contrast with Occam's razor? Well, Occam's razor says that the simplest explanation for a thing is usually the correct one. But I'm not sure if I can sort of easily identify a connection between the two. Yeah, should you rub poison ivy all over your body? No, but poison ivy grows out of the ground, right? Sometimes people say this about certain drugs, like a coca leaf. It's just God gave it to us, right? It comes right out of the ground. So how is it wrong to use cocaine or marijuana? It's just a little plant, comes out of the ground. But not everything that comes out of the ground or that's just given by nature is something good for you. Look, hurricanes are natural, but we don't want them. This pandemic virus, the coronavirus, it's a natural thing that just exists within nature, but certainly we don't like that either. Earthquakes come from nature, but we don't want them either. So some things that are natural are not too good for us. Some things that are unnatural are fine things. So you cannot just distinguish the case of what's good and bad based on what seems natural and unnatural. There has to be a more evidential, established basis to make that assessment. So let's see other examples of naturalistic fallacy. It's funny because sometimes advertisers make use of this fallacy quite often in the way that they market things to us, especially consumable products and other consumer goods. Even tobacco, right? You find some tobacco companies that will market themselves as, organic tobacco, natural, full leaf tobacco, as though it somehow means that it's not harmful to you, but it contains the same carcinogens, same tar, same cancer-causing properties. So to think of it as natural and therefore harmless is just wrong. Let's see. And food, sometimes it'll be labeled natural, organic, or whatever. I mean, there could be ecological and sustainability reasons for wanting to prioritize like a more locally sourced and conventional, organically grown produce and vegetables. But there's no like scientific evidence that when it comes just to its health impact, that that genetically modified crops grown on a mass scale have less nutritional value, or that they're somehow like bad for you than those that are grown organically. And sometimes people will say same-sex relationships are not as nature intended, and therefore they must be evil and immoral. But human beings deviate from nature in all kinds of ways. We're not walking around naked, picking things off of trees, fending for ourselves like old hunter-gatherer Cro-Magnon man. So we have to look at a case-by-case basis, basically, whether a given thing is good or bad, taking into account all relevant factors, not merely whether it's something that derives directly from nature or not. If you got cancer, right, and you wanted to go into homeopathic treatment, like no chemo, no radiation, some people do that, and I don't know if the case history is too favorable. I think that there certainly are some proven scientific benefits to the use of aggressive interventions like those ones just mentioned, and sometimes it might provide your only realistic chance to go into remission. So just make choices and judgments wisely. Don't, let's say, overly generalize to the thought that anything in nature must be so good and pristine and right, and anything that's somehow created in an artificial way or that's not given by nature is wrong or bad or unhealthy. So yeah, I guess this is really all that I had for today. I'm taking in the homework that you guys are submitting, so don't forget that it's due today and that it should be with me in my inbox. Remember that when you're submitting work to me, that you should submit it as a standalone email that you compose and place my email address in. Most people have done that, or when they have sent things through Canvas, they've done it through the inbox system. But when you just hit reply, like if you hit reply on next Tuesday when I send the quiz around, I won't get your quiz. Okay, so I'd like to make sure that no one has that mistake, but we'll deal with it as it comes. So I'm going to give you guys later today the grading key for the homework too, so you know how you did. And I'm going to also keep replying to any questions about individual student midterms, since those have been graded as well. So anyways, thanks everybody. If there's no other questions, I guess, today, then for now, anyways, have a great weekend. Hope you guys stay safe and healthy and productive if you can. And I'll just see you guys back on Tuesday. Tuesday, we have a quiz. The quiz is on all of these fallacies. I'm going to basically give you examples of arguments that are scattered throughout all 20 of the fallacies we learned. And you're going to have to basically be able to point to me what fallacy that example has. All right, so that'll be our quiz for Tuesday. We won't have a live stream like this. It's just going to be the class period given to you to return back the quiz form that I'm going to send. So I'll follow up with you guys by Canvas over the weekend just to make sure that we're all clear. But that's what's coming next. And then we'll move on from that to another topic afterward. Okay, so have a great one, guys. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon.